In 1975, Peter Parker, the Amazing Spider-Man, discovered that a supervillain named the Jackal had not only cloned Parker's late girlfriend Gwen Stacy, but also Parker himself. Spidey would battle this spider clone until the clone suddenly dropped dead due to an unstable cloning process.
Moving well into the 1990s, the clone returned, having spent time away suffering from amnesia and living under the name Ben Reilly. Taken, of course, from Peter's Uncle Ben and the maiden name of his Aunt May. Having the exact same powers as the wall crawler, Reilly would adopt the identity of the Scarlet Spider until DNA testing revealed that he was in fact the original Peter Parker, and the one readers have been following for the last 20 or so years was actually the clone.
You see, the individual everyone thought was the real Peter Parker had married Mary Jane Watson, Peter Parker's on-again, off-again girlfriend. Also, the two had recently found out that she was pregnant. This made Peter Parker boring and unrelatable because he couldn't flirt with other girls and because Marvel higher-ups subscribed to very lazy storytelling tropes. Can you tell this move wasn't very popular?
Yeah, it turned out that readers were not particularly happy to find out that everything they had grown up reading was a lie. Still, Marvel plugged away by having the two spiders work together to eliminate the Jackal and then have Peter and MJ relocate to Portland, Oregon to raise their baby. Meanwhile, Ben Reilly would fully adopt the mantle of Spider-Man and forge a life of his own by taking a job at a coffee shop called The Daily Grind because it was the mid-90s and Friends was a really popular show.
That was until 1996 when Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, stepped forth and revealed that he had orchestrated a false DNA test and that Ben Reilly was the clone the whole time. To prove his point, he killed Reilly, who soon crumbled into dust, confirming Osborn's claims. Of course, death in comics is rarely permanent.
In 2015, a storyline called The Clone Conspiracy saw Ben Reilly return, now under the mantle of the Jackal, and cloning organs for the intent of transplant, with dark ulterior motives, obviously. After that, Reilly would become Spider-Man once more, now working for a group called the Beyond Corporation.
Those are later stories for a later time, of course. For now, we need to get back to the Clone Saga of the 90s. Sort of.
In the late 2010s, Marvel began a new initiative, seeing well-known creators return to noteworthy runs with miniseries set during those runs. Peter David would have a storyline set during his classic Incredible Hulk run. Ron Marz would return to the Marvel Cosmic line. Larry Hama would return to Wolverine. Chris Claremont would do Gambit and Storm.
There was even the revisiting of a classic Fantastic Four storyline by Walt Simonson and Arthur Adams that saw the new Fantastic Four lineup consisting of Spider-Man, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, and the Incredible Hulk that got its own Legacy miniseries, and that's what I call them, Legacy miniseries, that was not done by either Walt Simonson or Art Adams. Poety's perfect, I guess. And yes, Ben Reilly would also get his own Legacy miniseries. This by J.M. DeMatteis, who wrote many of the high points of the Clone Saga, including issue 400 of The Amazing Spider-Man, that saw the death of Aunt May. From 2022, this is Ben Reilly Spider-Man, a.k.a. The Humanity Agenda.
Ben Reilly makes his way through the streets of New York City, where he inadvertently bumps into J. Jonah Jameson, who's surprised as Peter Parker moved to Portland. Despite Reilly's claims to the contrary, Jameson is insistent that this is Peter Parker who's talking to, until an emphatic rebuttal finally scares him off. Reilly then heads back to his apartment, where a TV news story about a killer preying on women encountered on a newfangled dating website is on the screen.
So yeah, again, this story is still basically meant to take place in like 1995 to 1996-ish. There's going to be some technological plot holes that pop up during this thing.
Reilly's brooding is interrupted by the breaking news of an escape from the Ravencroft Institute by an individual known as Carrion, who has been tracked down to a nearby cemetery. Reilly suits up and heads off to confront the killer. Carrion shrugs off police gunfire as Reilly attempts to reach the man inside, Malcolm McBride.
The Ravencroft Institute is basically the Marvel Universe equivalent to Batman's Arkham Asylum, aka a large psychiatric institute designed for superpowered criminals. The institute is run by Dr. Ashley Kafka, who became something of a confidant for both the Ben Reilly and Peter Parker versions of Spider-Man. Now, Carrion is a mantle worn by many villains who countered a specialized virus designed by the Jackal via his cloning process that would alter DNA into clone DNA and thus granting abilities like psychic abilities, invulnerabilities, super strength, and a necrotic touch, either meaning they kill whatever they come into contact with. One of these individuals was Peter Parker's science classmate, Malcolm McBride, who became this new Carrion we saw in the 90s.
When Carrion attempts to read Reilly's mind, an irate Spider-Man begins fighting back, pounding Carrion into near oblivion until a moment of clarity makes Reilly realize that McBride had relapsed and allowed the virus to take over control when he heard of his mother's recent death from a stroke. Finally, reasoning seems to break through, and it succeeds long enough for Malcolm McBride to reassert control over his own form and be returned to the Ravencroft Institute. At the Institute, Dr. Kafka adjusts McBride's medication to hopefully keep the virus in check, but Spidey still has his doubts, stating that the monster always seems to come back, which means Ben Reilly just inadvertently stepped on the emotional toes of Dr. Kafka's chief assistant, Edward Whalen.
We touched on the character Edward Whalen, aka Vermin, in my coverage of the Spider-Man storyline Kraven's Last Hunt, coincidentally also by J.M. DeMatteis. Now, again, Whalen was an abuse victim as a child who fell into the clutches of longtime Captain America foe Baron Zemo, who altered his DNA to turn him into a large man-eating rat creature.
After apologizing to Edward Whalen, Reilly talks with Dr. Kafka, who's long discerned the identity of the person under the Spider-Man mask. Reilly isn't too interested in therapy, but instead she offers friendship, which is something she had with Peter Parker. Unfortunately, friendship is something that Ben Reilly just isn't interested in. Reilly puts his mask back on and decides to head back home. As he's dead tired, he immediately crashes onto his mattress and falls asleep. However, his slumber is temporary as he's soon roasted out of bed by none other than the Scorpion.
Mac Gargan was a bumbling private investigator hired by J. Jonah Jameson to tail Peter Parker in order to figure out why Parker kept getting such great photographs of Spider-Man. Upon failing to learn Parker's secret, Jameson took Gargan to a biogeneticist named Dr. Farley Stillwell, who augmented Gargan's DNA with that of a scorpion. However, the process of the augmentation caused Gargan to go mad and thus swear vengeance against J. Jonah Jameson and Spider-Man in the process. Also, he became Venom at one point, but that's another story for another time.
Reilly is confused as Scorpion never learned the identity of either Spider-Man, but somehow knows that he's in the right apartment. Scorpion then leads Reilly on a chase to Shea Stadium, where footage of Gwen Stacy plays on the jumbo screen, and the two begin fighting through the streets of Queens, where Scorpion uses the car launched at a group of innocents as a distraction to simply just vanish into thin air. Wanting answers, Reilly pays a visit to Dr. Kafka, wondering how exactly it is the Scorpion learned his identity. There's just one problem, however. Mac Gargan has been at Ravencroft the whole time, and the security footage confirms it. So maybe this was a shapeshifter, like the Chameleon. Nope. Mysterio, maybe? The Master of Illusion? Also negative. Still dumbfounded and needing to get to work, Reilly stops to apologize and talk with Edward a little bit more and begins to adjust the idea of friendship before heading off to the daily grind.
Now, the funny thing is that Ben Reilly does seem to have a friendship of sorts with a burgeoning sci-fi film buff named John Diaz, who is a frequent patron of the Daily Grind. Also, that weird dating website killer is still on the loose and killing people.
Reilly decides to give friendship a chance and invites both Whalen and Diaz to a triple feature of sci-fi films at a local revival theater. After taking in the flicks, the trio heads out for a bite to eat, where a discussion about theory is interrupted by 4 metallic tentacles crashing through the window. Obviously, that can only mean one thing: Dr. Octopus. Just probably not the one you're thinking of.
Ben Reilly was not the first attempt at cloning Spider-Man. That would actually be an individual known as Kane, who began degenerating in his suspended animation tube, but somehow also got augmented strength and an altered mind that set him on a course to eventually start killing Spider-Man's adversaries, including Dr. Octopus, Otto Octavius. Enter Carolyn Traynor, a student of Otto Octavius at Empire State University and daughter of Seaward Traynor, an individual who became something of a mentor to Ben Reilly. To retaliate for what she thought was the ultimate betrayal of her mentor, Traynor would obtain an upgraded version of Dr. Octopus's harness and thus use that to become the new Dr. Octopus, also known as Lady Octopus. And no, I don't know if this is what inspired Olivia Octavius from Enter the Spider-Verse or not.
Lady Ock grabs Edwards and heads up to the nearby rooftops where Reilly is close behind, though he can't figure out what exactly happened to John Diaz. Reilly gets angry to the point that he winds up dropkicking Lady Ock over the ledge of the roof, only for her to disappear into thin air like the Scorpion did. It's then that someone else steps out of the shadows, the decaying corpse of Kraven the Hunter. Reilly is frozen in place as Kraven's corpse suddenly begins vomiting spiders which soon engulf him.
Okay, and so here's where some of these plot holes start popping up, as Kraven's last hunt took place well after that original clone story, so he encountered Peter Parker, not Ben Reilly, and thus Reilly would have no memories of Kraven being dead. Also, in a later scene that we're going to get to here, you're going to see Dr. Kafka using what is clearly Wi-Fi in 1996.
Edward appears to pull Reilly out of the pit of spiders, which were never actually there. From there, it's back to Ravencroft and Dr. Kafka again to talk with Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio. Reilly is dead certain that the former Hollywood trickmaster is using his old illusions. However, there's just no evidence to support the idea that he ever left Ravencroft. From there, Ben Reilly begins trying to explore every possible option as to who exactly is stalking him. Maybe someone found some old goblin tech? No, the goblin's old headquarters are still mostly intact. Maybe one of the mob bosses, like Hammerhead, found someone. Nada. Finally, deciding to settle down and maybe isolate himself a little bit more, Reilly tells John Diaz to stay away for a while, but he will still instead talk to Dr. Kafka and Edward a little bit more to try to figure out what's going on. A few days later, during the end of a shift at the daily grind, Reilly is suddenly attacked by his boss Shirley, which is strange because it didn't at all set off his spider sense. Shirley then begins shapeshifting, first into Kraven the Hunter, then Ben Parker, then May Parker, and in the process, letting slip the name Kane while doing so. Finally, Ben Reilly is greeted with the visages of George and Gwen Stacy before the stalker fully reveals himself as John Diaz, who claims to have been stalking his brother the whole time to get his revenge, as Spider-Side.
Spider-Side is another clone, however, he's a unique one in that he's actually a clone of a clone, and that he was cloned from Ben Reilly's DNA, not Peter Parker's, because apparently the Jackal never saw the movie Multiplicity. Anyway, Spider-Side has augmented strength as well as shape-shifting abilities, which allow him to take other forms, and thus he can infiltrate areas to eliminate people. And if you haven't figured out what those powers, yeah, he's actually this dating website serial killer that's been popping up in the background here. He's trying to learn humanity.
Spider-Side quite literally throws Reilly out of the shop and the two begin fighting through the streets of Queens. Spider-Side is not interested in killing Ben Reilly, however. Instead, he just knocks his brother out and then takes him off to some sort of warehouse location. When Reilly comes to, he finds Mary Jane Watson in some type of 1950s housewife get-up standing in front of him in a dream suburban living room. Spider-Side, in Mary Jane's form, it claims to be wanting to give Ben Reilly Peter Parker's life. The life Ben should have had. The life both of them should have had, and that Peter Parker gets to live because of all this stupid cloning. It doesn't have to just be MJ, however. It could be, say, Gwen Stacy, Betty Brant, or even just Uncle Ben and Aunt May again. It could be all of them at once, as it turns out Spider-Side has somehow learned to replicate himself. Reilly says that he's willing to accept Spider-Side as a brother, but only if he takes responsibility for what he's done and turns himself in. Knowing that that would mean being locked away again, Spider-Side decides not to do that and has all his various forms attack Ben Reilly. Reilly desperately tries to reason with Spider-Side, pointing out they could just forge their own identity without trying to live the life of Peter Parker. Live for the future instead of trying to recreate the past. A wrinkle soon pops up as Spider-Side begins degenerating due to the fact he's replicated himself too many times. Reilly pleads with his brother to hold things together long enough to get some help, but it's not enough as Spider-Side winds up exploding. Reilly emerges from the explosion unscathed and reports things to Dr. Kafka and Edward Whalen. However, they're soon interrupted by another assistant at Ravencroft named Dr. Liu, who points out that all of Ravencroft's prisoners have been freed because he freed them. It turns out that Spider-Side has one more replicant running around.
Yeah, it turns out Dr. Liu was actually the first of that dating website serial killing thing.
As a riot soon breaks out at Ravencroft, Spider-Side claims to have shed whatever remained of his humanity and takes Dr. Kafka and Edward hostage due to Reilly having to go deal with the inmates. That being said, as soon as Reilly leaves, Spider-Side grabs Edward and begins trying to induce a transformation to vermin. The numbers game and Mysterio's hypno fog begins getting to Reilly, only for Vermin to suddenly intervene. Reilly does his best to appeal to Edward and telling him he's his friend, and that works long enough as the two silently are attacked by Swarm.
Swarm? Nazi scientist who got attacked by irradiated Africanized bees in South America, got psychic control over them.
Vermin is able to immediately go after Swarm, severing the collective consciousness of the bees by ripping out the skeleton at the core of the system.
Ew.
As all of this has been playing out, Dr. Kafka has been trying to reason with Spider's side, pointing out that Ben Reilly did prove himself capable of accepting a new life and not just trying to relive that of Peter Parker's. Eventually it starts to work as Spider's side sees footage of Reilly getting overwhelmed by the villains, and it reaches out to the little humanity he has left as he begins charging out and attacking the inmates. Unfortunately, it appears too late as everyone comes across what appears to be Ben Reilly's unconscious body. However, Spider's side then proceeds to make a connection and begins transferring his consciousness into Reilly in order to resuscitate him, literally reaching in the same way he induced the Vermin transformation in Edward Whalen. Unfortunately, the strain is a little too much, and though Ben Reilly is resuscitated, Spider's side just slips into a coma, with Dr. Kafka watching him, should he ever reawaken. As for Ben Reilly, well, he's ready to move on and begin living his life, and not anyone else's.
I can't tell if the later Ben Reilly stories meant that he took this advice maybe a little too much to heart, or not enough. Anyway, that concludes our look at Ben Reilly's Spider-Man, aka the Humanity Agenda. How was it? Well, on the plus side, I do think there's some really nice artwork in this, coupled with some great characterization. I mean, Jim DeMatteis managed to make Spider-Side interesting, and Spider-Side was never interesting. And I think this is a very good, nice exploration of the character of Ben Reilly that actually makes him more relatable than he ever was during his original run. That being said, again, the plot holes do kind of get me a little bit. Again, the idea that this is meant to take place in 1996, and yet there are TV screens that are equivalent to this day in terms of resolution. Like there's some, flat TVs that you hang up on walls here that never existed in 1996. I should know I was there. Likewise, people having nice cell phone reception in Manhattan. Again, just, little bits and pieces there that don't really make a lot of sense. And sometimes the story can get a little repetitive. It seems like 3 or 4 times Spider-Side is explaining his motivations, especially right after he shows up. He does it for pretty much the entire issue, and then when he pops up again, he starts doing it all over again. And again, it's like I said, it just gets a little repetitive. I wish there had been more of Ben Reilly, Edward Whalen, John Diaz interacting with each other and bonding than, just Spider-Side monologuing all the time. Still, though, this is rather enjoyable. I do think this is a good, reasonable Spider-Man story. If you want to read something that's got a little bit of a different flavor to it that isn't so, bogged down in continuity, I do think this can work for you. I'm going to give Ben Reilly's Spider-Man, aka the Humanity Agenda, a B. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Hey guys, remember you can help support the channel at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcat productions. There you can request a tray to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. And as always, remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell.